Hello, and welcome to this psychoeducational video on coping with minority stress. My name is Maggie, and I am one of the doctoral interns at Counseling and Psychological Services. For this workshop, you'll need approximately 45 to 50 minutes to complete it. You'll also need a pen and paper to write out responses to the prompts provided in the video. If a pen and paper isn't available to you, you can certainly write out responses in a Word document on your computer or in a note on your phone. If writing doesn't feel comfortable for you, I would also encourage you to try recording your responses in the audio messages app on your phone. The last and perhaps most important thing you'll need during this time is an openness to self-reflection and personal exploration. Some of the topics we'll be dealing with can be challenging, but it's important that you are open with yourself and allow yourself to explore the responses you have to the covered material. You will never be asked to provide your responses to the prompts to anyone but yourself. So I do ask that you do your best to be honest and challenge yourself. So to begin with, we need to identify minority stress. And the researchers all seem to agree that minority stress includes 5 important factors. The first is the experience of discrimination and prejudice. And this can be more overt discrimination and prejudice, including having slurs directed at you based on your identity, or even being the target of racial or homophobic or gender-based violence. It can also be more covert, experiencing microaggressions and the like. The second factor contributing to minority stress is the expectation of rejection. This could be the fear that when you apply to a job, you will be rejected if someone looks at your resume and assumes your racial identity based on your name. It could be the fear of being rejected from a religious organization or a place of worship due to your gender or sexual identity. The third factor is making decisions about disclosure or concealment. Going back to the example just provided of being rejected from a place of worship due to your sexual or gender identity, some folks can choose to try and conceal their sexuality or gender identity for fear of being excluded. In other situations with people that make them feel safe, they may choose to disclose what is sometimes referred to as coming out. The fourth factor contributing to minority stress is the internalization of stigma, or what can also be thought of as holding negative views about one's own identity. This can be seen in LGBTQ individuals holding homophobic beliefs or women engaging in misogynistic acts. The fifth factor contributing to minority stress is the aspect of coping with these stress experiences. And while we will talk about coping later on in this presentation, it is important to acknowledge that sometimes the ways in which we cope with stress can be almost as harmful as the stress-inducing factors themselves. This is the minority stress model, and it was originally published in 2003 to look into the ways in which LGBTQ identity could be stressful for individuals who held those identities. That being said, it can be used with any individual who holds any sort of minority identity. And you'll see in this model some of the factors that were presented in the previous slide. So things like our stable characteristics, which includes our identity, and that's our sexual identity or our racial and ethnic identity. Now, I will say that sexual identity we do think of as a spectrum, and we can always be open to learning more about ourselves. That being said, we think of it as stable because even as you're learning more about yourself and maybe learning new terminology that fits better with your identity, that doesn't go back and erase who you have been. You may have a new term that is more correct, but you've always been that way. For example, learning that maybe I'm not bi, but maybe I'm pansexual. That doesn't erase the experiences that you had prior to naming that term. Developmental influences can also be a major factor in regard to our experiences of minority stress. If you come from a background where you feel supported in your identity growing up, you are less likely to experience minority stress moving forward. It's certainly not unheard of, but those developmental experiences can act as a protective buffer against minority stress. Unique identity characteristics can also contribute. So the interaction between your unique identities also plays an impact. If you have more minority identities, for example, if you are a lesbian woman of color, you are more susceptible to minority stress simply because you have more identities that can be accessible to that stress. And then finally, stigma-related processes. So thinking about our experiences of stigma and the different situations that expose us to it. Those moderating factors, as they're called, can also interact with stigma-related stressors, so those experiences of objective prejudicial events, and our general psychological processes. And what I mean by that is our coping skills, whether we have them or whether we don't, how easy it is for us to utilize them, and then also how effective they are. And then our social and interpersonal interactions. So socializing with a big group and then more one-on-one. And then our cognitive processes. So things like how we view and interpret the world and information that we take in. We can also have our overall mental health be impacted by what are called group-specific processes. And those are things like expectations of rejection, whether or not we feel the need to conceal a particular identity, and then also how successful or unsuccessful we are in that concealment process. And then the internalization of stigma. And as you'll see on the right side of the screen, our experiences of objective prejudicial events, our coping skills, our interactions with others, our cognitive processes, and then the expectations of rejection, our need for concealment, and internalization of stigma can all contribute to our overall mental health, including internalizing of stress and mental health struggles and externalizing. And when I say internalizing, that can be that stigma. There's something wrong with me because I hold this particular identity. People won't like me because I hold this particular identity. And externalizing. things will go wrong because I have this particular identity. They all think something's wrong with me because I have this particular identity. Internalizing and externalizing of mental health struggle can present itself as isolation, as depressive symptoms, so things like feeling down, having limited motivation, and even thoughts of suicide, and anxious symptoms, as we will see in the next slide. So as you can probably guess, stress can often contribute to anxiety, which means that individuals who are experiencing minority stress based on any minority identity can also experience some of these common anxiety symptoms. And when we say common, I hope that we're not misleading you into thinking that these are simple or not impactful, because they can have a really big impact. So some of the physical symptoms that can be brought up by minority stress are increased heart rate, chest pain or pressure, a feeling of tightness, sweating, nausea or upset stomach, particularly when we're anticipating something that can induce our minority stress, or we've just gotten out of a situation that made us experience that minority stress. And then tense muscles. We often hold tension in our shoulders, our backs, neck, and our jawline. And they can contribute to an overall sense of discomfort in our own bodies, which, depending on what kind of identity is causing your minority stress, can actually exacerbate that level of stress of, oh, I don't feel right in my body. Maybe for someone who's trans and feeling a little discomfort with their body, feeling tense can contribute to that feeling that there's something wrong with my body. I don't want to be in my body. Behavioral anxiety symptoms that can be caused by minority stress include avoidance of situations that can make us feel unsafe, feeling the need to flee from those situations. And then, particularly in situations that can include microaggressions or even more overt acts of violence, freezing, feeling motionless like a deer caught in the headlights can be a very common experience. If someone says something racist, even if it's not directed at you as a person of color, you may still feel unsafe in that situation and unable to respond. And then cognitive symptoms can be a very common response to situations that induce minority stress. Fear of physical injury or death. Looking at the news lately, it is certainly understandable why a person of color may feel unsafe in particular situations. Frightening thoughts, images, or memories. Sometimes when we overhear something homophobic or any kind of a slur, it can bring us back to the first time we heard those words, the first time we experienced some sort of discrimination based on our identity. And then poor memory or difficulty concentrating. If you are concerned about your safety, the way in which your brain processes information to make memories gets impaired. And we can also have difficulty concentrating on the things around us as we are focused on the things that we anticipate being dangerous. So I want to present you with our first journal prompts. I'd first ask you to consider In what ways have you experienced minority stress? I'd next ask you to consider, in what ways have you contributed to another person's experience of minority stress? I'd encourage you to take 5 to 10 minutes, pause the video, and reflect and respond to these questions. So now that we've spent some time learning about what minority stress is, the next thing we should do is think about how to cope with it. And coping with minority stress can fall into two categories. The first is individual means of coping, and the second is community-based approaches. The first and perhaps most challenging aspect of coping with minority stress is creating, building, and strengthening your own personal acceptance of your identity. And there are many ways to do this. You may have heard the phrase representation matters, and that comes into play when we think of building our acceptance of our own identities. So, watching movies and films that accurately and appropriately represent a real life individual or a character with your identity can help build positive feelings towards that identity. Reading fiction and nonfiction books about a person or character with your unique identity can also contribute to that increase in acceptance. Talking with loved ones about your identity can also contribute to your personal acceptance of your identity and can help your loved ones to be better informed of how your identity impacts you, which can also increase their acceptance of your identity. That being said, I don't want this to be a way for folks, even if they are your loved ones, to ridicule you or hurt you. So knowing what is a healthy boundary for yourself in regard to this particular coping method can be vital. Next, and perhaps most effective coping mechanism that I can share with you is engaging with others who share your identity. There is a lovely quote from the show Blackish, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but it essentially says that spending time in space with others who are like you isn't separation, it's congregation. And the importance of that distinction is having a space to share with others who are like you provides everyone in that space with the opportunity to be themselves without having to provide background about how your identity impacts you. Rather, you're more able to be yourself as a full individual. It provides individuals in that community with support. It can unite them around a common cause. And it provides space to grow in your understanding of your unique identity. So I'd once again encourage you to reflect on these questions. First, how have you dealt or helped someone else deal with minority stress in the past? And have those methods been helpful? Next, which technique mentioned in this presentation could be helpful to you in the future? Why? Take another 5 to 10 minutes to pause the video and reflect on these questions. The next thing I'd have us talk about is how you could potentially benefit from working with CAPS to deal with minority stress. The first thing to think about is just how you can access services. So, scheduling a CAPS appointment, all registered students who have paid the health fee have access to one free 30-minute assessment appointment and then 2 free appointments for the semester. And once those free sessions have been used, health insurance can be billed or the student's bursar bill will be charged. And you can see here our phone number is 812-855-5711, which can be called anytime Monday through Friday to schedule an appointment. In addition, we also have SACS services, which are focused on individuals who've experienced sexual assault. And all of those services, including psychiatric care, are free of charge. We also have emergency services. But one of the things that we offer, which is most targeted towards the experience of minority stress, is our Let's Talk program. It's free, it's informal, and there's brief consultations available for any IU student about any area of concern. And Let's Talk Now is offered through the Academic Center, Hudson and Holland Scholars, and our various cultural centers across campus. Let's Keep Talking is more formal counseling that is targeted to our university's traditionally underserved students. And we have embedded counselors at the Asian Cultural Center, La Casa, and Neil Marshall Cultural Centers. We also serve group scholars and the Office of International Services. These services have changed in how they're being provided due to COVID-19, but they are still accessible to our students, and we would love for you to utilize them. These services are also often paired with providers who share identities with the students that they're serving, and they can be provided in a number of languages, including Spanish, Mandarin, and Urdu, in addition to English, of course. And these can be scheduled through as the same techniques, the same method as a general CAPS appointment. We also have free support groups. So throughout the fall semester, we had a Let's Talk About COVID group, and we have a number of support groups. Every week, we have a gender expressions group. We also have 2 empowering students of color groups, one for undergraduate students and one for graduate students, because that's an important area where the intersection of identity comes into play. We also have our Queer Space group, which meets every week and is open to anyone who finds themselves existing somewhere under the rainbow. There are a number of resources that are also available through our website, including the WellTrack app, which is available and free to all IU students. There are also a number of online resources that you can make use of at any time, including a few self-assessments that can help you determine if seeking out professional help for things like depression or anxiety or substance use would be of benefit to you. Staying connected with CAPS is also very easy to do. We're all over social media, and the best place to get up-to-date information regarding CAPS and how we're being impacted, like the rest of the university, by COVID-19 is by checking out our website. And as a good college student, I know how important it is to provide references. So if you would like to learn more about anything that has been discussed in this video, please feel free to check out any of the listed articles or websites. I truly hope that this has been an informative workshop for you and that you've had the opportunity to learn about some ways to help yourself and to help others. Have a great rest of your day.